Hobart's Funnies. A collection of bizarre tanks that were used during the Second World War. Now, I know that we all collectively love to call tanks that are designed even slightly out of the ordinary weird, cursed or funny. But Hobart's Funnies got the prestigious honor of being called funny even when these things were brand spanking new. Plus, the story of why these tanks were built and the man behind the funnies is really interesting. So let's have a look at that today. In the summer of 1942, the Soviets were not doing so hot.
Help me! Help me!
Yeah, things around Moscow had kind of stabilized, but Operation Foul Blau was at that time in full swing, and the Germans were moving towards the oil-rich south of the Soviet Union. So on August 13, 1942, Joseph Stalin sent an urgent memorandum to Winston Churchill and Roosevelt, basically begging them to reverse their decision and launch an early invasion on Western Europe. The British and the Americans knew that they were not ready for such undertakings, and that any attempt to land on Western Europe would fail. However, they had to show somehow that they were committed to their new Soviet allies. Operation Jubilee, or the Dieppe Raid, was supposed to do exactly that. It was going to be a relatively small amphibious attack, mainly consisting of Canadians. Around 6,000 infantry, supported by a regiment of tanks, were supposed to capture the port of Dieppe in France. The port was to be captured and held for a short period of time, to test if a landing like this would be doable and to gather information. They also hoped that they could destroy German defenses, port structures and important buildings. So this was going to be a quick 20-minute adventure. What could possibly go wrong? Yeah, it didn't really go as planned. After only 6 hours and some absolutely horrible losses, the Canadian troops were forced to retreat. The Dieppe Raid was an absolute disaster, and only one landing force temporarily achieved its objectives. And even then, only a small amount of military intelligence was gathered. So, was Operation Jubilee a complete waste? Well, some might say not really, because some lessons were learned during this raid, but at an immensely high cost. After Operation Jubilee, all plans to invade continental Europe were completely revised. Another important lesson that was learned was that specialized vehicles were a must if the Allies were to overcome the German defenses. British command therefore decided in 1943 to create a specialized unit to oversee the development and training of the crew of these specialized vehicles. And the man they chose to be in charge of this project was Percy Hobart. Now, I know I promised a funny tank video, and I promise you we will get there. But first we're gonna look at this funny man, because he's really interesting as well. And learning about him made me understand how they ended up with stuff like this right here. So, Percy Hobart. Percy Hobart was born in 1885 in what was then British India. He came from a military family, with his father being a civil servant in India and his brother being a general in the Indian Army. Percy Hobart also wanted to join in on the military fun and joined the British Army in 1802. He graduated from the Royal Military Academy in 1804 and was then commissioned into the Royal Engineers. It wasn't until World War I, however, that Hobart became to distinguish himself as somebody who could think outside of the box. He fought in Iraq and France during World War I, where he got a reputation of being a brilliant but independently minded officer. You see, Hobart wasn't simply content with following doctrine. He would often adapt and improve upon it, something that didn't make him a popular figure among the other officers. He also came across a technology that would define his career: the tank. Percy Hobart saw the immense potential that this machine had and believed that this was going to be the future, a view that wasn't shared with many of his colleagues at the time. Tanks were still seen as a tool for one task, that being overcoming fortifications and trenches. The theory was, as soon as the tank had done that task, the tank was no longer needed in war. Hobart correctly saw this different, believing that tanks were the future of ground warfare and a tool that, if developed correct and if deployed correct, could break stalemates and lead to more mobile and decisive battles. So in 1923, Hobart decided to join the newly formed Royal Tank Corps. He became a colonel in 1928 and in 1934 formed the first British tank brigade, where he developed new tank tactics. All of his theories on the tank were very forward-thinking at the time, and all of his ideas and newly developed tank tactics were also published. And strangely enough, German General Heinz Guderian got a translated copy of Hobart's writings, so the man that is credited with coming up with Blitzkrieg borrowed some of the ideas of Percy Hobart. Anyway, back in Britain, Hobart was not a popular figure among the other officers. He was dicking around with tanks and advocating for mechanization. Again, this didn't make him popular with the cool kids and made him a bit of a pariah in the British Army. And more respectable officers wanted to get rid of him as soon as possible. So in 1938 they give Hobart a big fat promotion to basically go fuck off to Egypt. That gets rid of the problem, gentlemen. Anyway, Hobart was sent off to Egypt to form and train the new mobile force, which would later become the 7th Armored Division, famously known as the Desert Rats. So yeah, he did pretty good there. However, all of his tactics and doctrines around tanks were at that time still untested. As far as the army was concerned, Hobart's fancy smancy ideas around tank warfare could be completely useless. So in 1938, Hobart was taking off active duty. However, he didn't want to sit on his ass and do nothing the whole day. So he joined the local defense volunteers and was put in charge of defending his hometown of Chipping-Campden, which seems like a bit of a waste of talent. And while he was there, he had to witness this from the sidelines. Yeah, it turns out that tanks were the future of ground warfare, and that they were a great tool when deployed correctly, being able to break stalemates and lead to more mobile and decisive battles. Oh man, if only somebody could have seen this coming like 10 or 12 years before this happened. After that fiasco, Winston Churchill of all people dragged Percy Hobart out of retirement. 2 years later, in 1943, Percy Hobart was put in charge of the development and training of crews of specialized vehicles for the Normandy landing. Which means that we can finally start talking about the funny tanks. But real quick before we do, only around 17% of the people that watch these videos are subscribed. So if you're part of the 83% who is not yet subscribed and you like what you see, then please consider subscribing. Okay, it's time to talk about the funny tanks, and there's a lot to go over. So we have some Churchill-based funnies and we have some Sherman-based funnies. And again, there's a lot to go over. So I might go a little bit fast over the less interesting ones. But let's start with the Churchill-based funnies. Let's start with the Churchill AVRE, or AVRE, I'm just gonna call it AVRE, which stands for Armored Vehicle Royal Engineers. Now this vehicle was not a crazy departure from a normal Churchill tank. It replaced the main gun of the Churchill with a 230mm Picard Spigot
You just blowing from stupid down?
Picard Spigot mortar. So I think that the strangest thing about the Churchill AVRE was the way that it was reloaded. It had a break action, so if you wanted to reload the mortar, you had to open it a bit like an old air rifle or an old shotgun, but slightly bigger. And to do that, you had to open a hatch. In fact, there is some footage of it which looks very strange. This was meant to be a demolition vehicle meant to destroy German fortifications. And the range of the Churchill AVRE was pretty short, as you can see right here. So it had to come pretty close to its target to do its job. Now, the Churchill AVRE was to destroy the German fortifications. But here comes the question. How do you get a thing like this close to the target on a battlefield? Well, the Churchill AVRE had two attachments that would help it get closer to its target. Plus it had the added benefit of making the tank look a whole lot more silly. So let's look at those two attachments. The first one of these attachments was the bobbin. This was an attachment that could lay a sort of carpet on difficult terrain, that could then act as a temporary road. Tanks and other vehicles could easily get stuck in mud or slip on pebbles, like what they had to deal with on the French beaches. The bobbin was supposed to solve or at least alleviate this problem. And when the crew was done with laying this road, they could detach the bobbin attachment and use the tank like a normal Churchill AVRE. So now you made it off the beach. But oh no, what is that? It's a big fuck you in the form of a hole in the ground known as a tank trap. No, not that kind of trap. Good thing that we have the second attachment, the Fascine carrier. The Fascine carrier is a high-tech bundle of sticks.
Individually we are weak, like a single twig, but as a bundle we form a mighty faggot.
So how would this bundle of sticks work? Well, in real, it was quite simple. The Fascine would fill up the tank trap with its big girthy sticks, so that all of its colleagues could also go over the trap. I think you get the idea, big sticks fill up hole. And just like the bobbin, as soon as the Fascine was dumped, they could just use the tank as a normal Churchill AVRE. Oh, and fun fact, this is not the first time that the British used the Fascine idea on a tank. During World War I, the British also used the same idea on a Mark IV. So the next problem could be a sharp incline, a small river, or a ditch that was too deep for the Fascine. Well, then you would need the Churchill Ark. Basically, a Churchill tank without a turret, instead having a foldable bridge on top. When completely folded out, it could turn into a bridge of around 12 meters long or 40 feet long. But what if the incline, river or ditch was too big for the ark? Introducing the Churchill Great Eastern Ramp. Now this thing had a very interesting way of deploying its ramp. The Great Eastern would first drive up as close as possible to the obstacle, then deploy the ramp upwards. 2 groups of 3 rockets would then be fired to unfold the ramp. When unfolded, it could make a bridge that would be around 21 meters or 70 feet long. Which means that if this bridge was deployed, the bridge would be 3 times as long as the Churchill tank itself. You're starting to see now why people refer to them as funnies even back in the day. However, the Great Eastern Ramp was never used. They did build 10 of them, but they were never deployed. Talking about funnies that were never deployed, the Churchill Onion, or the Double Onion. Once again, this was supposed to be an attachment for the Churchill AVRE. The Onion was an explosive box that resembles a string of onions. How does that look like a string of onions? Anyway, the Onion featured a framed attachment to the Churchill AVRE, carrying boxes of explosives. The frame would stay horizontal during travel, and would swing down near its targets, such as bunkers, obstacles, or anything else that needed a daily dose of nitroglycerin. When the front hook was secured for detonation, the crew would retreat to a safe distance and set it off. Although it proved to be effective during trials, it was never used during combat, out of fear that the incoming fire of the enemy would trigger the explosives, which would pose a high risk for the crew. And to be honest, I think it's better that they didn't deploy the Onion, because this shit looks like the obvious weak point of a boss fight.
And you attack its weak point for massive damage.
So these last 2 funnies might not have been the most successful ones. But let's look at what is arguably the best and most famous funny. The Churchill Crocodile. Now, the Crocodile wasn't the first armored vehicle with a flamethrower. There were some other experimental vehicles that came before the Crocodile, such as the Basilisk and the Cockatoo.
Get in the damn car now! Get in here!
Hell, the Crocodile wasn't even the first Churchill that had a flamethrower. That honor would go to the Churchill Oak. Okay, so we need to go back for 1 minute to the Dieppe Raid. The British deployed 3 of these flame-throwing Churchill Oaks during this operation. However, they were quickly lost and abandoned. After reviewing those results, the command threw away the whole concept. According to them, tanks were too vulnerable on close range, and flamethrowers should only be used as man packs. In comes Percy Hobart and says, nah, fuck that shit. Flamethrowers on tanks are dope. And he started to put pressure to continue development on this idea. And in 1943, a prototype of the Crocodile was demonstrated in front of the War Office. It seems that at that point command came to their senses and gave the green light for the development of the Crocodile. Now the Crocodile was a really smart idea in real. In real, it wasn't a specialized tank. Instead, it was flamethrower equipment produced as a kit that could fit on any Churchill. You could, in theory, even fit these kits onto Churchills on the field. Which meant that you could give a flamethrower kit to any Churchill operator and just say to them, go crazy. Which luckily never, or at least almost never happened. These kits instead were given to units with specialized training, which was probably a wise decision. The kit consisted of a trailer holding the fuel, pipes that would be fitted along the underside of the tank, and a projector which would replace the whole mounted machine gun. There you go, that is your Crocodile, a trailer with some plumbing. But some really successful plumbing. The Crocodile was one of the most feared weapons of the Second World War, with them playing an important role during the Normandy campaign and later battles. According to some reports, resistance ended almost immediately when crocodiles were deployed with their flames. And I get why. When you see one of these things crawling towards your position, there's not much you can do, besides praying that it would drive over a mine. Oh, and talking about mines, we haven't addressed one of the biggest problems that the Allies had to face during D-Day. Mines. So there were a few funnies that were custom made to deal with this problem, some more successful than others. On the less successful spectrum, we have the Churchill Snake. The Churchill Snake was, once again, a modified Churchill, this time designed for mine clearing. Its main gun was replaced with a set of 40 MLCL Snake rockets, which when fired would detonate the mines ahead of the vehicle and clear a path to the minefield. However, only a few were built and they were never used in combat operations. Though this idea was very forward thinking, it proved to be a little bit too difficult to execute at the time. Luckily we have a few more vehicles that had to deal with minefields, and some of them were extremely successful. Not this one though. In the same category of less successful funnies, we have the Churchill medieval war crime machine. Okay, it might look like a horrifying weapon that would be used during the Middle Ages, but in real it wasn't that impressive nor useful. This tank is known as the bullhorn ploughed mining tank. It used a plough in front of the tank. You know, those same things that farmers use. It would clear minefields by digging them out of the ground and pushing them to the side, without detonating them. And the British did use these tanks, with some mild success on Sword Beach. This system could be mounted on both the British Churchill tank and the American Sherman tank. But did they really have to make it look like a medieval torture device? I mean, I cannot imagine anything more terrifying than seeing this coming towards you. I take it back, that is way more terrifying. So this finally brings me to the Sherman funnies. In the most famous and successful mine clearing funny, the Sherman Crab. The Crab is a mine flail vehicle. In the most simplest terms, a rotating drum with heavy chains, smacking the mines and safely detonating them. A very simple idea, but a very effective one. But the Crab was not the first mine flail. That honor would go to the Matilda Scorpion. Now, how these things were developed is also quite an interesting story. The idea of a mine flail is most often credited to Captain Abraham du Toit, a South African soldier. His concept of this mine clearing system showed so much potential that he was sent to England to further develop his idea. Before leaving, du Toit shared his idea with Captain Norman Barry, a mechanical engineer that was sent to evaluate the system in 1941. Barry later served in the British 8th Army, becoming a strong opponent of the mine flail, running his own experiments in early 1942. At the same time, Major L.A. Girling was assigned to develop a similar device. When Barry discovered this, he shared his work and ideas with Girling. Together with Barry's prototypes and Girling's team, they developed the Matilda Scorpion. At the same time, du Toit was still working on his mine flail idea in England. He envisioned more of an attachment that would go in front of any tank. At the end, the two ideas were laid in front of Hobart, who chose the specialized vehicle. But not the Scorpion. That thing had way too many problems that the Crab would later fix. For example, the Scorpion needed two engines, one for the tank and one for the flail. The Crab would improve upon this by only having to use one engine, being able to power the flail with the engine of the tank. And even though the Scorpion was reasonably effective with clearing mines, the hastily developed flail was unreliable and broke down frequently. Again, something that the Crab would improve later. Another problem that the Scorpion had that the Crab would fix was that the Crab could actually use its gun, at least when the flail was off. The Scorpion couldn't do that. In fact, they had a Mark II of the Scorpion where they just completely removed the gun, because it was completely useless. Anyway, the Crab was a successful design and was used during the rest of the war. Oh, and if you were worried about du Toit, don't be. He was awarded £13,000 for his contribution to the war, which is around £500,000 in today's money. But the Crab was not even the weirdest funny that was used during D-Day. That honor has to go to the Sherman DD, which stands for Duplex Drive. Development for a floating tank already started way before the 1940s. At that time, many ideas were thrown around to see if there was any way to make a tank float. The first one of these ideas that could potentially work was having giant collapsible floats on both sides of the tank, which would give it enough buoyancy to swim in the water. However, it was quickly realized that this idea had a few problems, mainly the size. To make a tank swim, you would need two floats, which would be around the same size as the tank itself. Even when these things were deflated and collapsed, they would be way too wide to be launched off an offshore landing craft. So that idea went straight into the trash. Luckily, somebody quickly came up with a better idea to make a tank float. This is the flotation screen, a device that would fold and was made out of waterproof canvas. When unfolded, the screen would cover the upper half of the tank, giving it enough buoyancy to swim in the water. And this idea showed a lot more potential. A prototype was made of a Valentine DD tank and was conversely being tested in 1942. However, the prototype quickly sank during testing when it was subjected to machine gun fire. However, the army was still very impressed and placed an order of 450 Valentine DDs. Later it became clear that the Sherman would be a better fit for the screen than the Valentine, and the DD screen was adapted for the Sherman. One of the reasons why the Sherman was chosen over the Valentine was that the Sherman could move in the water with the gun still pointed forward, which meant that it was ready to fire as soon as it landed. The Valentine at that point was also an older tank design. Now, I know that the Sherman DD looks really silly, but I would argue that this was the most important and impactful funny. The Sherman DD was used during the Normandy landings by the British and Canadians. Most DDs swam ashore successfully and provided crucial fire support. However, on Omaha Beach, strong waves caused many tanks to sink. The loss of these crucial DD tanks led to heavy losses of infantry on Omaha Beach, which shows how impactful the Sherman DD was. With many people believing that if more DD tanks would have made it safely to the shore, that there would be less casualties under the infantry. Anyway, that's about all the funnies. When I started with this video, my plan was just to laugh at some tank designs. But the more I started to look into it, the more I found out how critically needed these vehicles were during D-Day, and how forward-thinking some of these ideas really were. Anyway, thank you for watching till the end, I'll see you next time.